Hello, so this is my final reflection now. I'm just going to talk through my game and how I feel about it, as well as just my work on the project overall. So, if I'm being completely honest, I'm not super happy with the final product. It functions, and it is beatable, but it just feels like it's got so many elements that I'm just not pleased with. Um, First of all, I mean just the visuals, you can see here. I don't think it's a very nice looking game. The assets are kind of cohesive, they do fit together. The low poly and voxel style does work. However, it's just floating platforms, and it just doesn't look right. It just looks weird. Also, the lighting isn't very good because I just didn't have time to work on the lighting or add in any post processing or any of that stuff. It just feels unpolished. I think that's the best way to describe the game. It's functional but unpolished. Um, I think the reason I'm not super happy with the game is simply because I did restart development so late. That made it very difficult to really get anything super well made in that time. If I had the time from the start and was working on this, I think there'd still be janks to it because I'm just not super competent at code. But equally, it would have looked nicer, I think. I feel like I could have at least pulled some of that off. And I could have fixed some of the issues earlier and actually added all of the mechanics I wanted. Added more levels than just the 3 I've got. I could have just done a lot more if I knew from the get-go that this was my plan and this is what I wanted to make. I will say I don't regret picking the game I made out of the 3 to begin with because I feel like it was the easiest to repurpose. Um, I could not have made that taxi game. Like, I've never worked with AI. I have no experience doing AI. Making taxis that figure out where you are, where the enemies are, where the people who are getting taxis are, all these systems are getting to locations. I've never done AI. I could not have set that up. And if I did start doing that, there was no way I could really rework any of it. Whereas with this game, because it was 3D, there was a lot I could use, like the health system. Obviously, unfortunately, I wasn't actually able to use the character movement. I had to completely rework that, which went against my original plan. However, the health system I could reuse, damage I could reuse, all these different things I could rework. So I'm pretty happy with what I chose and how I was able to use some of the elements I made. Like I said, it was still slower going than I wanted because I did have to, basically remake the entire player movement. But I think it worked out for the best anyway later on because this does run and feel a lot better to control than it would have. Other than that, I think the levels also just aren't very interesting to play. Like some of the sections are okay. Like I think that kill wall section's alright, but it can be a pretty significant difficulty spike, really, especially so early on when you're just still learning things. Plus, even some of the designs kind of off with like the kill wall where it spawns. It spawns on where the moving platform is, so sometimes you will jump on that platform and just die straight away because of the way the timing works. So it's just a lack of general polish on the game. But yeah, I mean, a big issue as well was just the code, because like the character in particular, I was thankful I reworked that because originally I was using the script that was provided to us in the lessons. Like I said, that's what I used the kaiju game I was making before the brawler with. But originally I used that, and frankly I just did not understand what it was in the slightest. I just had to go with it and guess. Making the new script, I at least knew what everything was and did, so it did pay off better in the end in that sense. Um, and because of that, I was able to add the animations in, and later on polish them up slightly. There's still issues with the animation, like you'll see here, the movement did play there, but it does work now. But that said, again, going back to my code and the lack of polish, it is done with terrible code where it breaks every single time in the numerator that, oh, you're not doing this anymore, so we can end this. It just doesn't work great. Like, it looks nice enough now, and it functions now, but it's just not efficient code. It's not good. You wouldn't see it in a final release game. I don't think this game is in a releasable state. I don't think I could publish this, which obviously is kind of the goal of the module, is to make a proper publishable indie game. This isn't that. This is a prototype for all intensive purposes. It's got a good core. It shows what the game's going to be, or what I want it to be. But frankly, it's not at a level where it is a game. It is just a prototype of different mechanics thrown together with some rough looking levels that are playable. But again, unpolished. There's just design aspects that don't work, even on top of the code. going through the other notes I've got written down, there's just the fact that levels took me so long to make, which I didn't expect. I did aim to have a lot more time to polish at the end of the game, but levels took way longer than I anticipated them to. I thought they'd take like 2 hours, maybe 3, because I thought they'd be fairly modular, especially with all the different assets. But with the way I set up the moving platforms with the endpoint, I had to manually drag it every single time, which really slowed things down. As well as that, the assets I used are really small cubes. And while I could grow them, I still had to kind of copy and paste them so they actually looked like they scaled with the character and were the right size. And every time I copied different cubes, even if they were part of the same general group, it would just delete them, which is really annoying. Or the sizing and scale would get messed up. So that took a lot of reworking, which was really annoying and took ages to do. That's what was lucky about level 3, because it's completely in the dark. I just use normal Unity cubes and you can't really tell. And like I said, I honestly think that's the best level in the game. Not just because you can't see it, so you can't see how ugly it is, but just the mechanic is really interesting of limiting movement and how that transitions from all of this and repurposing some of the controls into that. I think it's genuinely really cool and interesting, and that shows that I did have some creative ideas with this, despite how simple it actually is in the end. Another thing I ran into was, I'm missing some key elements like the sounds. I've got them on the player, and I have them on sorry, not on enemies. I've got them on the player, breaking platforms, the boss, things like that. But it feels like they're missing on things like projectile spawning, and I feel like they're things that need it. Like when a projectile spawns in, the player needs to know so they know to avoid something. As it stands, it's just not there, so they don't know. Um, I think the reason I didn't add it in the polishing phase at the end is because, again, I just didn't have time. But in addition to that, it was just a case of, I would have had to have coded it so, oh, if you're in this range or on trigger enter this, then play this sound. But that would do that every time you got to the attacks. If you dodged it and then jumped back into it, it would just play again. So I didn't have time to actually write a competent code that would fix it. So I mean, I had to cut the 4th level because I didn't have time. It was the same with collectibles. I had to cut those because I just didn't have time. I think collectibles would have added a good amount of content to the game and really polished it up a little bit. But the issue was with that, if you have collectibles, you need to have something that you can unlock. And I didn't have time to make something you could unlock. I mean, the original plan was to have a level. I then thought about maybe I could do a character, but re-importing the character and making a different variant of him that saves and remembers which one you're playing, that just sounds like a lot of work that I couldn't do. Like making that many models for a different costume just because you got all the collectibles. It just felt like an unnecessary feature at this point, and I didn't have time to do it. Another thing was the playtesting. I just left that way too late. I was meant to do it after level 1, which I think was a good plan. However, it took me way too long to make level 1. Like my original sprint, I was supposed to make it in, I think, sprint 4 or 5, or at least the block out of it. In the final game, I didn't make it until the second to last sprint, and that's when I got my feedback. People played it, I got feedback, but there wasn't too much I could do, and I didn't have time to get feedback on the final 2 levels at all. So level 3 and 4. Because again, the plan was once I had all the levels, I'd playtest again. But I just did not have time to do that because it was the last week and I had to just throw something together. So a lot of them were just built on what I thought and my experiences, which, when you're the person making the game, you understand all of the quirks and how it works. It's like, I know you can trigger melee early there, as you just saw, and hit both enemies because it's just on the trigger. A player wouldn't know that. So a player could run into that and really struggle or take unnecessary damage or things like that. And I didn't have a way to test to make sure that was the case or not. Like here again, the punch lasts so long you can just edge into the enemies. No one else is going to know that. Only I know that. But it is what it is. I think, like I say, level 3 was fortunate in that I think that was quite good. And the boss fight, I think, well, I die a lot of times to it in this video. I'm not going to lie, I die quite a lot. It's a pretty well designed and I think quite balanced fight. I think it's got loads of interesting elements and it really brings in everything that the players learn over time. So it brings in the wall swapping, you also bring in the spinning platforms, but they act as now damage. You have torches that activate things. You have all these different components on the boss. You have jumping on its head and platforming on moving platforms. It really ties everything together and feels natural and like a good conclusion. So I am happy with the. To be fair, while I didn't playtest the last two sections, I am really happy with them. I think they're the best parts of the game. Level 1 is too basic and boring. Level 2 is just way too much of a difficulty spike and it's not balanced at all. That's the other thing, my game is way too difficult. I always wanted it to be a fairly challenging platformer, but not to the extent it is. Because I mean, the game is probably about 8 minutes long. This video is about 20 minutes because I died so much and I'm the guy who made the game. In fairness, some of it was just me being bad, like here, I just can't hit this tower for some reason. Playtesting it, did it every single time. As soon as I started recording the video, I just couldn't do it. But, you know, it's just kind of all over the place. It's these swapping walls you can see here. That's really where the difficulty starts to just take a turn. But again, I didn't have time to fix it or balance it. But yeah, I think overall that's probably all my thoughts. I think, essentially to summarise, because I've just kind of been rambling, I think the game is fine, it functions, but there's nothing impressive about it. It's very basic, it's not very polished, it's quite rough, despite its simplicity. It's very much a game that was just made to function, and it doesn't have enough creative sparks in it. The only bits that I feel are creative are the boss fight and level 3. That's kind of all it is. It just feels like the game was made to be those. If I had more time and was able to add more mechanics and add crazy things like the chase sequence I wanted to add from Sonic, or collectibles, or a bonus level, or if I was more confident with art and could make more assets myself, I think I probably could have done quite a decent job with it. Especially if I started with this project from the start rather than the brawler. I really do feel like I could have actually made something quite good with this 3D platformer. But as it stands, it's just a very basic game. I do think there's ambitious aspects, like the fact I made the character, the way the character animates. I think, while it's not perfectly done, it's really interesting. It gives it a really unique selling point of the voxel style, which imitates the retro look as well. Because that's another thing I should mention, is the music and sounds I was very happy with, because they also imitate the retro feel I was going for. I got very lucky to find them. Yeah, I mean, you can just see me keep dying here, and it's like, some of it is stupid mistakes, but other bits are just like, why have I got such a difficult section at this point, you know? I guess this is the last platforming section of the game, so it kind of makes sense to an extent, but if I'm dying this much to it, it's clearly not a good move to have this in the game, but I didn't have time to replace it with anything else or rebalance it, so it's here. So I also do think that, in regards to my other work outside of the actual game, I think I did a decent job. I think the fact I made the sprints beforehand really helped out quite a lot, because I had a guideline to work off, and while as the project went on, I definitely didn't use that guideline as much as I maybe should have. It really helped me from the get-go to be motivated and actually work on it, because that's something I ran into with the first project, was I just didn't really know where to start and what I was doing. Whereas this time, I sat down, wrote up the design document, and then wrote up the sprints, and knew what I was doing. Straight away, I could just get straight into it and be like, okay, I need to get this done this week. I need to then work on this and do this, which works really well. So again, I just feel like if I did something like that earlier on, I maybe would have actually finished my first project. But yeah, this is the boss fight, which I'm really pleased with this. I think, you know, it's nothing special, but I think it's quite cool how it brings every single thing you've learned into the game. I do think as well, when it came to my original idea, it was just too ambitious, which is the reason I did have to change it. The idea of making a brawler in the time we had was just not really feasible. So I did just have to not, just not do that and just cut it completely. I wouldn't have had time to do it regardless of if I started it then and worked on it super consistently. It wouldn't have been polished, it would have been really rough, because I just don't have the level of code required to make that kind of game. And really, I should have picked up on that a lot sooner. We're going back to this game though, because I have to keep jumping between the two projects. Going back to this one. The bugs I've noticed are the pause menu. If you pause the game and then go to a different scene, music doesn't play again. I don't know why. I assumed it was to do with the void on awake, but I tested it. It's definitely not. I've got no clue why it is because I made it so when you click on another scene, it sets that scene to active. So it's not just locked in that state. It just doesn't play music anymore. Again, it's very rough and not polished, but I looked at fixing it for like an hour and I had to give up because I didn't have time to spend on it. Another issue is here with the swords. Last time I said they were very close together. If you were paying attention, you would have seen that. Well, this time they're quite far apart. This is kind of closer to how they're supposed to be, but because it activates, if it activates when that sword is next to it, the swords are going to be basically on top of each other, which isn't intentional of what I wanted. To be completely honest, I've only just noticed that now in the video, but it's something. That's what I mean. That's something I should have picked up on and noticed way earlier on, but I just didn't. But, I mean, the sword's picking you up. It does look kind of janky. As you can see, like it just like kind of grabbed you there and was dragging you along. But it's intentionally sort of designed that way because it's supposed to be like Fall Guys with the obstacle courses. But you can get stuck on the swords and they hit you. Another thing I'll say is the menu system, because a lot of this game is just made to function, because that's why the code's not great either. Another example of that is honestly the menus. The ways they work is when you finish the game, you unlock a second menu, which has a second version of every single scene, so they can go to that menu because that has level select on it. So it's a different menu. A player is not going to notice that. So in terms of the game, it works. However, when you're looking through the files, you're just going to think, what was he thinking? This is like the worst thing I've ever seen. This is the worst menu system ever made, which it frankly is. But I didn't know how to set up a save state, and I didn't have time to learn to do that. So I just had to throw it together in a way that it works in the game. Yeah, I don't know why I'm struggling so much with the boss fight in this playthrough, because again, I did find it really easy before. It was just doing the video I started to struggle with it. How long is left? Because I might skip ahead. Oh no, it's the end pretty much. Yeah, I mean, another thing was just the assets and being limited by that, because I could only use what was on the asset store. So like these skeletons that don't animate is because that's all that was available, and I don't know how to animate or anything like that, so I just couldn't set any of that up on time. So yeah, there's those issues as well with just polish, with it lacking just key elements like that. The enemies as well, I wanted the ranged ones to be witches like I put in the design doc, because I wanted it to be Halloween themed. Well, the only one available was like a super anime chibi 8-bit looking thing, which just didn't blend in at all. If I wanted a witch, I'd wanted like a green, evil looking, creepy thing or something in like a black hat, not a anime girl. But that's all there was, so I was, again, quite limited by what was available. If I had time, I would have made my own assets, but this is another thing here, so I'll just pause there. The actual end screen is super jarring, I think. Like, you just go from jumping on its head straight to this screen here, which just says story and lists basic text explaining the story. It's not great. It just feels really unpolished. It almost feels like a bug, to be completely honest. It feels like there should be like some fanfare music, or you watch the boss die and then a portal spawns, or something like that, so you at least see the boss get beaten, rather than it just being like, oh, health 0, we're going straight to this scene. Again, it functions, it does everything it needs to, but it's just, design-wise, it's so rough and badly put together. But yeah, from here you'll see. So this is the different menu, where if you go to level select, again, this is something to do with really limited time. I didn't have time to make the level options look nice. Level 1 and 2, I think, really have cool styles. Like this would have been a nice thing to do for all the levels, but level 3 is in pitch black, so you can't see anything. And the boss fight is just a floating thing, so again, it looked awful. So I was just like, well, I'll just put symbols on that signify what they are, so the player can be like, oh, it's that level, I know what that is. The design idea is there, but it looks really rough in actual execution. But yeah, another thing that took ages was the cursor. That was a real struggle. But yeah, you'll see here, it loads the scene, works fine. You then pause it, you have all these options here, and you can then go to level select. So yeah, my final thoughts on the game are that it's fine, it functions. Same with the code, it functions, but none of it's good. The game isn't great, and neither is the code. They're both like just complete 5 out of 10s. They're functional, and you can't really argue that, but they're super rough and unpolished. So yeah, it's not my best work. I was quite ambitious with it from what I could be, but it still feels overly simple despite that. I think, like I say, if I had more time and didn't start halfway through development, I could have probably made something decent, but it is what it is. So yeah, that's my final thoughts on my game.